What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? Good to see you, gang. Let me glance down real quick, make sure I turned on the mic. I did. Good for me. How you guys doing out there? Happy Friday. Good to see you. Bright and early. Managed to get things aligned in a hurry today. Not, and, spent plenty of time on it, but ahead of the schedule we've been on so far in the new year. Let's put it that way. Not doing a 5 o'clock show today, thankfully. What's up, A. Dean? Yeah, almost first. Got to get here real early to beat Cujo. Cujo usually just jumps into the chat when I open the room, I think. But good to see you. Appreciate it. Andy's here. Cujo, happy Friday, pal. Hope your day's going well, too. Hope the week went well. Pretty solid slate last night. I feel like last night was the, by far, sanest slate of the new year so far. We talked about how flat it was going in, and it basically remained that way, throughout the night. The one stupid spot was Kyle Anderson only played a handful of minutes, and we had him as a high-end value because we figured he was going to play a normal amount of minutes. As you can see on the board here, we are going directly back to the Warriors tonight. It is ugly out there. Tonight's a lot more chaotic. There are several big stars available on the slate, so it's a completely different situation from yesterday where the values didn't matter as much. Today, min-price, low-price, critical value types are obviously rocketing to the top of the board along with the stars. So where yesterday was super balanced and we were playing kind of in the mid-range and it was a nice, easy slate, tonight is going to be all over the map. And we've got more emergent news to talk about. So we'll get through that. With our early 4 p.m. start and our nice stable setup here, I expect in the next 2 or 3 minutes, a bomb will drop on the slate and it'll be completely different than what we've got on the board here. Something like Nikola Jokic not playing or something to that effect. But right now, as things look, I could have started this show, said hello to everybody, and then said play the Golden State Warriors with Nikola Jokic, with a few Bulls and a few of the Sixers, and good night. Because that is the slate right now. There are plays, of course, across the board in other spots, and we'll go through all of them. But you can see, just this dominant share on DraftKings right now. That is 4 Warriors and Nikola Jokic. On FanDuel, it's roughly the same thing among those players. You throw Paul George into that mix at 54%, 46%. Josh Giddey's on the board at nearly 60% FanDuel, 28% DraftKings. Tyrese Maxey's on the board for 44%, 23% across sites. Zach LaVine's on the board. Giannis is pulling a big share as another star that you could throw into that mix, fortunately. Kobe White going back to the Bulls. That Washington and Chicago game is offset from the other ones by pace and upside. Chicago just going up against a terrible Washington team. That one totals out way higher than everything else on the slate. Chicago's a huge favorite. Everything's aligning for them. A lot of guys that are capable of disappointing us in that one. But, it is right now, we just have this massive chunk of ownership up at the top of the board, and it's going to thin out awfully quickly as we go through things. Who did I miss? Mr. Sarr. Let me fix Mr. Sarr here real quick. One of these days I'll fix that naming table. I finally did it for the Ace Mind upload for DraftKings, so now I don't have to manually fix a few guys' standard deviations, which is time-saving. It's amazing how long I'll tolerate one of these things. And how many of that took 5 seconds, but 5 seconds adding up every single time I do it, where I could spend a minute and a half and just fix the naming table. One of these days. Anyway, looks like some people have piled in. We're kind of stalling for some time there. Mama says, on a side note, Scotty Barnes is closer in height than I thought to Allen and Mobley, and he's taller than Allen. Is he really? I didn't realize I knew Scotty was tall, but I didn't realize Scotty was taller than Allen. Scotty is 6'7". All right, let's just pull up the roster. Easier to do. Allen 6'9". I think Allen's 2 inches taller. Mobley's 6'11". So, and that's just per this roster page. I go to NBA.com's roster page, actually. Listed heights versus actual heights also tend to differ to some degree. Yeah, NBA.com has him has Allen at 6'9" also. So I think you're off by 2 inches there. They're next to each other in the paint, and he was taller. Yeah, I mean, is he actually the same height? Are they both actually like 6'7"? I could definitely buy that, or but negligibly taller. But the way the NBA's got it listed, there Allen is 2 inches taller. Anthony Taylor, happy Friday to you too. Cujo's Mamba's here. Cujo's here. People piling into the chat. So let's dive in a little bit. Take advantage of our prompt start time today. Let me get the Vegas board up, the most recent lines. 7-gamer today, but again, way more chaotic than yesterday and way more Starsy Scrubsy. Top of the board, the Bucks and the Magic. Paolo Banchero expected back. I've got him projected to play essentially half the game, right? I just took 24 minutes and threw it at him. Could go 26, could go 20. Don't really know what it looks like. There's no real reason to go there right now. Pieces and parts on the Orlando side. The Gogas and Cole Anthonys of the world are still going to look all right. On the Milwaukee side, both Giannis and Dame are probable to play. I fully expect them. You can see, as we just mentioned a minute ago, we do have a big chunk of Dame on the board, of Giannis on the board, rather. I would expect plenty from there, but that's kind of a low-end game compared to some of the other ones. 212.5 point total. That is our low point of the slate in terms of the game total. But Giannis is Giannis, and he's going to stand tall no matter what. Bucks favored by 7.5 on the road in Orlando. The Pellies at the Sixers. The Sixers are a value spot. No Embiid. It's a mess in Philadelphia as usual. The Pellies. Who the hell was out? Was it Herb was out? I think that's who it was. Yeah, Herb's out today. Trey's out today. And then Ingram continues to be out. So we'll see probably some mid-range guys coming through from the Pellies, but they're not one of the top priorities of the day, where the Sixers side is coming up a lot more, and it's mostly around Tyrese Maxey and Paul George, which you like to see. Those are our go-to guys from that team. 220.5 point total in that one. Sixers favored by 5 at home. Golden State, the value spot of the day, essentially has the entire starting roster on the out list today on the second night of a back-to-back. They're 10-point dogs at Indy, 222.5 point total there. Indy relatively pacey. It's not a bad spot. The game total is okay, and I just think the Golden State guys are all the guys we can expect to play anyway are all so low priced that you can see how they're coming up in that sim. We'll talk about going higher, lower on those numbers. But there's just a ton of value, and those are the critical values of the day. So you just go in there. The one thing that sucks is you do have to, trust the minutes or take a shot at the minutes. And there's going to be some fragility in there. Some of those guys probably won't play exactly to expectation. Some other guys will get more than expectation. But the good news is kind of up and down that team right now. You can go there. On the Indy side, probably just the odds and ends that we normally get out of there. Maybe we'll see some Hallie or some Turner, assuming Turner plays. Sacramento and Boston. Boston favored by 11.5 at home, 227 point total there. I would think the usual suspects from there, any of the starters from either of those teams should be perfectly fine, but it's probably more going to fall as in are who they are kind of a spot. Sims are hot off the presses, by the way. Outside of the top end, I haven't really gone through the nitty-gritty of it. I like to find those things out along with you guys. OKC and the Knicks, a good one in the Garden. Knicks 4-point dogs at home, 226.5 point total. That'll change if Karl Anthony Towns doesn't play. He's questionable. Deuce McBride questionable again on the Knicks side. Otherwise, Typical situations on both sides of that one. I do think you could take pieces out of either side of that. The Knicks starters are always going to look good just given the ridiculously condensed rotation and the minutes that they play. And then OKC, you've got the star guys on the top end, and then you've got that broad range of guys who play, upper 20s minutes at like 0.75, 0.70 fantasy points per minute. You can always get to those guys because they're not highly priced, but we've got so many other values on the board. It's more going to be a situation I expect where it's just going to be like, well, you could take Case and Wallace instead of guy X from Golden State and blah, blah, blah. Washington and Chicago, that pacey one, that high totaled one, 242 total is the highest on the board by a mile. Next highest is the 227 between Sacramento and Boston, and then 226.5 for OKC New York. So there's a lot of daylight between those game totals. Chicago favored by 11. Talked about how everybody on Chicago is coming up. The Wizards side, I assume we're going to see plenty of those guys coming through, at least in mid-teens type ownership. And then Brooklyn, Denver to round out the night. Jokic still questionable. He's been sick the last few days. Brooklyn essentially missing everybody, but everybody who does play is kind of just bad. So it's not necessarily the go-to value spot. Brooklyn 14-point underdogs on the road in Denver, 220 total in that one. Jokic, and I'm not sure what else. Talking about some of the ins, the outs. As of the last update a little while ago, probables, Moses Moody, Giannis, Dame, Middleton, and Paul George, all probable. Questionables, Trace Jackson Davis, kind of a big one. If he doesn't go, that's just yet another void for Golden State. Tyrese Halliburton, Miles Turner, both questionable. Ryan Rollins, Paolo Banchero, DeJounte Murray, kind of a big one there. Deuce McBride, Karl Anthony Towns I mentioned. Jordan Walsh, Johnny Davis, Rashawn Holmes, Jordan Poole, Alex Sarr. So two relatively big pieces for DC in that target game. And then Nikola Jokic is questionable. And then here are all the Warriors who are out so far with TJD questionable. We have Steph's out, Draymond, Kuminga, Gary Payton, Brandon Podziemski, and Andrew Wiggins all are out. Isaiah Jackson continues to be out. Aaron Nesmith, James Wiseman continue to be out. Gary Harris, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, Mo Wagner all continue to be out. Ingram, Herb Jones, and Trey Murphy are all out. Andre Drummond, Joel Embiid, Kyle Lowry, KJ Martin, Jared McCain are all out. Jared McCain, they announced out for the rest of his rookie season, which kind of sucks. He was playing pretty well. Alex Caruso, Ousmane Dieng, Chet Holmgren, AJ Mitchell, Mitch Robinson, Marvin Bagley, Sadiq Bey, Malcolm Brogdon, Torrey Craig, Ayo Dosunmu, Bojan Bogdanovic, Cam Johnson, Max Lewis, DeAnthony Melton, D'Angelo Russell, Cam Thomas, Trendon Watford, Dariq Whitehead. That's basically half the Nets roster. And then Vlatko Konkar is out, and Aaron Gordon is up to doubtful as of the last report, but I don't expect him. And that is what we're dealing with right now. So a number of, there are many fairly big questions still lingering. Definitely the impact of TJD if he doesn't go, just creating even more value for the already absurd Golden State spot. And then, I fully expect the probable guys, but if we get DeJounte Murray ruled out, if we get Karl Anthony Towns ruled out, those obviously create major value situations. Jokic we've seen recently, if Poole and Sarr don't play, you get even more upside from the Washington side of that Washington-Chicago game. So, a lot of dominoes still to fall on this one. What's up, Doug? Good to see you. Yeah, Mom, again, the teams deliberately list guys at incorrect heights. So if they say 6'9", it could easily be that he's 6'7". I trust your eyes. But maybe he was wearing thicker shoes. I don't know. I don't know how these things work. Maybe he's just got longer legs and he looks taller. Michael Knack says Golden State gonna kill everyone. Yeah, I don't love how, it is a mathematical value spot, right? There is no denying how those guys are coming up right now. But it's definitely not comfy with the way that, they can yank minutes around. Again, like we were expecting, you can see Kyle Anderson right there, 26 minutes. I think I had him at 28 yesterday, and he went out there and he played 9 minutes. He put up 14.5 fantasy points in those 9 minutes. But 9 minutes. Thanks a lot. That was a highly owned value play for me. I had a decent night in spite of it. Put one in the top 1% out of the just small handful of lineups that I played. Nice profitable night on all the lineups I played. So it didn't ding me that much, but what it would have been a nicer play. He was highly owned, though. It wasn't crazy. But yeah, 9 minutes, just as an example of what could happen with some of the run here. But as you can see, I mean, top of the board, Golden State is all over the place. And that's how we're accessing our stars and scrubs builds. That is the path to doing that. There's nobody, LOL. Hoopers lie like heck about their height, either bigger or smaller. Yeah. I mean, it's a thing. It's been a thing for a long, long time. And the weight, they mess with that too, because that matters as well, as far as especially the big men. But yeah, the heights are unreliable at best. It's worse in college by a pretty big factor, but yeah, they're not reliable. Doug says right back to the well with Kyle Anderson. For me, it was in 80% of my lineups, and somehow I managed to break even. There you go. Yeah, I figured you meant that kind of too. I would have corrected that as well, though. But yeah, I think I said it yesterday during the show when I was talking about Kyle Anderson. Like, we have all failed with Kyle Anderson before. I wasn't expecting it to be because he only played 9 minutes. I was figuring it would be more because he played 26 minutes and just wasn't good, because we've had that happen many, many times. But yeah, right back to the well. But as Michael Knack points out, Buddy Hield, top of the board on both sites. In our sim, he came up in 94%, more than 94% of our top 150 on FanDuel, 87%. He's the most highly owned player on both sites. We're getting a ton of Dennis Schroeder alongside, more so on FanDuel. He's the same price on both sites, but it's more impactful, it looks like, to the FanDuel slate. So let's get into some of the position by positions. But yeah, a lot of Golden State. Again, if you need to punch out, if you're, you got to head out of work or whatever, Golden State, 3 or 4 guys from Golden State, 2 guys from each of Chicago and Philly, and then Jokic, Giannis, however you can get them. And that's pretty much your build as of right now. Things might change around it, but both sites, that is your approach right now. Let's get into the positions. Same slate on both sites as far as positions in games. So we'll cut by DraftKings positions. So yeah, Buddy, top of the board, 0.94 per minute on DraftKings. He's an unreliable at best player, but the 0.89 on FanDuel, 0.94 on DraftKings has at least been consistent year over year. Technically, the average usage for him this year is a little bit higher, so presumably it would be even higher than his 20.8% that he's averaged for the season in this role, where it's he's going to be at least a big chunk of the offense today. So absolutely justifiable. He's 4,300 on FanDuel at shooting guard, point guard. We got him again, nearly 95% of our top 150, way above the field. He's projected at like 50% ownership, but obviously if we're approaching capacity, we're essentially doubling that. You can take less. Don't get me wrong. You don't need to go out there and lock Buddy Hield into all your lineups. It's not what I'm saying. But what the sim is telling us is that he is the most advantageous spot on both sides. We got him 87% of the time on DraftKings. You can see it in the value scores, 7.25. Again, we're looking for 5 on FanDuel. That's one of the higher value marks we've seen all season at 7.25. 7.96 on DraftKings. We're looking for 5.5 for 4,100 at shooting guard only. The positioning, the lack of the multi-position doesn't seem to matter. 7.96, again, one of the better overall value scores just across every position that we've seen through the entire season. Everybody from Golden State is out, but he's one of the competent NBA players on that team, tonight. Dennis Schroeder's another one, and he's totally justifiable at 54, point guard, shooting guard on DraftKings. 76%, that's against, I believe, like mid-40s% ownership in those in the projections that this went against. On FanDuel, it's about the same number. So again, we're essentially doubling up the Dennis Schroeder ownership. These guys are a path to getting to other things, but both of those guys should also be expected to produce. It's not like we're talking about value guys who are projected in like the 20s or like the teens. A lot of times you see a $4,100 guy who is, 0.75 guy, and you got him at 18, 22 points. And it's like, all right, maybe he gets us to 25, 26, but he's projected for 32. Schroeder's projected at 36. You could take those down a little bit. You could mess with the minutes a little bit. But right now, these guys are, I'll never say locks, but extremely, extremely important, high priority plays on this slate just for the value. Paul George, assuming he's in, he's probable. No Embiid, a lot of other missing bodies for Philly. Maxey is right here. Paul George right there. They're coming up. George is coming up more on both sites. Maxey's at a bigger number on the FanDuel slate for 92 than at 94 on DraftKings. That makes sense. But George, high priority. 54% is a little bit below the field, apparently. I think that came down. I just glanced at this before the show, and I think that's lower than that now. Let me see. Yeah, our 54% is slightly above the field now. It would be more like this kind of an arrow where it's like essentially flat, but slightly above. It came down very, very slightly, but he's essentially in half of everybody's lineups. 5.34 value score for 7,400. He's a very functional mid-range piece that slots in well with the star guys that we're getting big chunks of on this site. Neither of whom are on the board here. But Jokic and Giannis are coming up like crazy. He also slots in well alongside his teammate Tyrese Maxey for a $9,200 price, as well as some of those Bulls. So a non-prohibitive price on the upside of Paul George. He's playing at 1.06 on FanDuel, 1.07 on DraftKings, where we got him 46% of the time. That's essentially level with his ownership for 7,500. Multi-position on both sites. He's a definitely highly functional piece from like the upper mid-range at worst. And in this situation, with upside for more, back toward his 1.13 from last year, back toward that 26 kind of usage. This game, again, kind of middle of the pack, 220.5 point total. But like I said when I was teeing it up before, the fact that our Sixers exposure is essentially coming through Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and then to a lesser degree Kelly Oubre, that works for me. Give me Philly's three best players. All right. So that's making sense. Lindy Waters, another guy coming out of Golden State. We are below the field on FanDuel at 3,800. Here's a value guy this is kind of a good example of the type of guy I was talking about. 3,300 for a 22 projection. I mean, it's giving him a 6.89 value score. But when we're talking about just the raw projection and then against that, what does the ceiling look like? And the ceiling and the raw projection are both going to be significantly higher for a guy like Buddy Hield than Lindy Waters. We've also got Buddy projected to play 4 more minutes. That could even out. But Waters plays at 0.73 this year, 0.74 on DraftKings. Last year, that was better at 0.89 in the minutes that he played. He also only plays 18 minutes a night, so you get a little bit more of a condensed sample. There's less time for him to accrue counting stat type fantasy points. But he's just a price-based value, and you can see how the ownership already falls off. 28% of him versus the gigantic pieces of those guys that we got. He looks a lot more like some other guys from some other teams, right? Like Lou Dort at 4,018% exposed is not crazy far off the 33. Lou Dort's a 5.94 value, 6.89 for Lindy Waters because he's so cheap. But what is the projection? The projection's a little bit higher. What do the minutes look like? The minutes are definitely going to be, or almost definitely going to be higher for Lou Dort. What does the ceiling look like? The ceiling's going to look a little higher for Lou Dort. They're both similar per minute players, but he'll eclipse them on minutes more. You know, if you roll this 100 times, 90 times he'll eclipse Lindy Waters on minutes here, and he'll just be able to achieve higher scores. But the math obviously favors the Lindy Waters play at 33 based on that critically low salary. And at 38 versus 51 on FanDuel, that comparison doesn't really exist. Lou Dort, a little bit high priced on the FanDuel slate. 3.3% exposed, sub 5 value score. Not nearly as important. Josh Giddey, critical play. Again, that Washington game is super, super high paced. So those guys are just going to be running up and down the court. The total at 240 something. Again, significantly higher than every other total on the slate. So you're just taking these guys. And it's another spot where Giddey, Levine, White, those are the straightforward guys to take out of Chicago. It's not like we're really stretching for crazy guys. Every one of those guys is a good point per minute player. Giddey's playing at 117 FanDuel, 120 DraftKings this year. And he only costs 7,000 across sites. That's really, really low price for a guy putting up that kind of a fantasy scoring rate. Nope. I'm going to go greater than or equal to. Didn't I just say he was at 1.2? Where the hell did he go? Greater than or equal to. Oh, well, whatever. Let me sort it by this. Yeah, I mean, outside of, $3,200 Jalen Smith, who's not going to be relevant to this conversation, really, among the non-centers, look how Giddey's price is kind of offset. 8,900 for 1.23 from Dame. 8,500 for 1.21 from DeJounte Murray. 8,900 for 1.20 from Jalen. 7,000 for 1.20 from Josh Giddey in the highest total, highest paced game of the season, of the slate. Kind of works for me. Same deal on FanDuel, 6,800 versus 88 versus 85 versus 89. Josh Giddey is mispriced for his production. You could argue that Russ is right there, but Russ even 75 for his 1.19 FanDuel, 1.19 DraftKings for 69. That's a closer comparison on DraftKings where he's 100 less. That's why we're getting, only one share of Russ on DraftKings, but we got none on FanDuel. But that's a really low, that's what's creating this nice value score. That's a really low price for Josh Giddey's production. And that's on the full slate. That's out of everybody. Get back to the guards. Let me reload the news page. We're coming up on 4:30. Let's see what's changed. Ooh, Herb Jones out indefinitely with a torn labrum. He was already off the slate. Michael Knack says Levine, Hart, Jokic. I don't mind throwing Josh Hart into the mix. He'll always work for me. The minutes are just absurd. The production's there. Could be Travis says, hey, Terry, for the highest projected ownership players on the slate, who are you most likely to pivot off in single entry if you played on DK? That's not really how I would approach it, Trev. Right, we got to get off this this train of thought about individual ownership being bad. Right, these guys are the most highly owned guys because those are the critical pieces on the slate. So, I mean, if your question is which one of the Warriors do I want the least, probably Slow-Mo, probably Kyle Anderson. But I could easily say that that's Kevon Looney. I don't know for sure that Kevon Looney's playing 21 minutes. So between those two guys, I could scratch one of those guys, and that would probably be my answer because of the fragility of minutes and everything. But those guys are excellent value plays the ways that they're projected. And those are the guys that you want, right? So when we're talking about lineup builds and where you want to pivot, you don't really want to be pivoting out of these plays at the very top of the board. Do you necessarily need all of them? No, of course not. But that as a core, and you could throw Paul George into that mix, honestly. If that was your core for a single entry, I would think it was very, very solid and the correct way to build that lineup. That would almost definitely be the first handful of players that I clicked on. You're doubling your center there, but you've got shooting guard, small forward, shooting guard. I think that all works. Where you want to make your pivots is in this territory. Changing one or two of these guys out for one or two of these guys, from here to here. You don't want to go from here to like here. That's the mistake that was built into the industry over the last, decade or 7 years or whatever it's been. And, going back to the Awesemo days, like we talked about that incorrectly. And then like we tried to change the perception for a while. And it's something that I've talked about for a long, long time. It's about your combinations. It's about how that comes together. And you want to take the things that are going to put you on that optimal build path and then make small changes from there. Small deviations from the optimal build is what's going to get you toward the top of the tournament. So the best plays of the day you want, and the public's going to be right about those. You want those plays. Can you swap out one of those Warriors? Absolutely. Do I trust Kyle Anderson and Kevon Looney? Not at all. Buddy Hield and Dennis Schroeder a little bit more. But both of those guys are up and down players, too, who can easily disappoint. Do I trust Lindy Waters? No. So it's a really fragile team, but the value's there, and that's the build. That's where you want to be. And then you're looking to change out, all right, let's say you got the lineup and you built it, and you've got Maxey in there, 9,400 as a pretty high-priced guard, 23% exposed in our sim. And if you're just like glancing at the sim, you can use these tools to build single lineups, single entry lineups. And I use these typically to try and hand build the optimal every day. And that helps me it helps inform me about the slate. And you can do that by going by these optimal rates and by these exposure rates from the top 150. Get pretty close to the optimal builds and then go from there. But if you're taking Maxey, all right, the sim's telling us we want a little bit less than the field of him anyway. He's a 5.12 value, but maybe I go in a different direction. Kobe White, we were talking about how important that Bulls game is. He's only coming up at 20% owned for me. That's also below the field, but we can see immediately there's a better value score. He's at significantly lower salary, so maybe that buys me my second upgrade. Or I take it a different direction. Maybe I'm getting to a lower owned Shea. At 10-4, I'm spending a little bit more there. Maybe I'm getting to a lower owned Tatum. I'm spending a little bit more there. And then I'm exploiting yet another value spot somehow. But you want to make smaller changes than getting just like blanket, I want to get away from the most highly owned guys of the day. Because the most highly owned guys of the day are going to be the best plays. Are they all going to succeed? Absolutely not. If we threw these, 10 guys, that's almost exactly 500% DraftKings ownership. If you throw those 10 guys into the blender and run this slate 10,000 times, you're going to get a maximum. You won't get one slate in there where all 10 of those guys succeed. I pretty much guarantee you. You'll get maximums of, 7 of those guys on 0.001. You're talking about more often than not, 3 or 4 of those 10 guys are going to succeed and get us anywhere near what we want, what we need. So those are the best plays of the day. And those are the guys that you want to build your lineups on. But there's no lock-ins. There's no guarantees. But what those guys do, and especially the low-price value guys, is open up the access to be able to move around some of these pieces and combine some of these pieces with Jokic, with the top-owned, the top trajectory guide to the ultimate fantasy score of the day. I hope that at least makes some sense. I know I'm rambling a little bit. This is what I love talking about with this stuff too, though. I think this is the most important, most interesting things to discuss for this. And it's somewhere where the industry, again, years ago, set the wrong foot out for everybody by saying, that guy's highly owned, you don't want him. That is completely the wrong thing to do. So hopefully some of this makes sense. Let's get back on track here. Just nobody says that's really the thing. You can't completely predict the future perfect every time. Have to shoot a little volume at least. Yeah, again, you want to spread, and you want to have significant exposure to those top plays, and then that's why you play multiple lineups. You want to change up those combinations beneath them, and it's all about how those combinations cascade together. And that's where you create your differentiation. That's where you create your leverage. But the top plays of the day, again, are going to be popular for a reason. The public is no longer, the public is well informed. Let's say that. And then Mama says, Towns has been the most optimal play in DFS this year, but with Fox out, is Sabonis a better play? I'm not sure how they mathed out. I would say it's not a crazy thought, just given the matchup for Cat as well as being banged up. He was He was visibly not totally great with that knee. He's only 5% exposed on DraftKings, 0.6% one lineup on FanDuel. I expect we've got more of Sabo in here. There he is. Not much more, but a little bit more. And not off the mark as far as how that comparison lines up. You're talking about a difference of about a fantasy point on both sites in Cat's favor, but the value scores favor Sabonis on both sites for a little bit less money. So, yeah, not a bad pivot there by any means. That makes a ton of sense. I would say, we'll talk about it when we get to the bigs in a little bit, but, I would say poke around. Sabonis might not be your best choice for that role, but between those two, that is not a bad thought. Power says, Candelator God's plan. Did I miss somebody's question? Oh, Candelator was saying who's better, Waters or Anderson. In a vacuum where everything goes according to plan with the minutes, Anderson. And I think that's kind of how Power's answering the question there. To me, it's Kyle Anderson. But again, I thought Kyle Anderson was going to be good last night, as did the entire industry. And he went out and he played 9 minutes. So, so the minutes are going to be totally fragile there with Golden State. But the way things are aligned in between just like who's the better per minute player right now and how do they look, it favors Kyle Anderson. And as Power put it, as a player in a PPM, it's Kyle Anderson. There are no backups for Kyle Anderson in his position, so he should get the minutes, and they're super short-handed. I say Kyle, but Kerr doesn't give a fuck about logic, and I totally agree. All right, so getting into some more of these guards here. So, again, the Bulls, Giddey's here. Super high priority. The price is wrong on both sites for his current season production. LaVine and Kobe White right here. Nice big chunks of both of those guys. Technically, we're slightly below the field on both of those guys while still having essentially 20% in our pocket of both of them. So 2-3 Bulls in any given lineup, absolutely fine / desirable. Multi-position eligibility across both of LaVine and White. LaVine's been playing well at a 1.07. That's up a nice jump from last year. We talked about it at the very beginning of the season. What was the new spacing going to look like for Chicago? And it's kind of come through. And as far as Zach LaVine, it's kind of come through for him. The usage is up a little bit, 1.07 per minute on FanDuel, 1.14 on DraftKings. It's been looking pretty decent. Kobe White for the cheap price, 69 both guard spots on FanDuel, 66 both guard spots on DraftKings. We're above our value thresholds on both sites, 5+ on FanDuel, 5+ on DraftKings. He looks slightly better from that sense than LaVine does, but I feel like LaVine's landing in more lineups probably on the back of the small forward eligibility, where White's restricted to the guards and we've just got so much going through guard. But both those guys, high priority from the mid-exposure range. And honestly, I don't know. I think I would want to spread across all the Bulls guys and kind of let it fall where it may against the field like the numbers are showing here. I was going to bring up maybe trying to build a position on one or the other of White and LaVine, but I don't know that it's going to necessarily work directly like that. You could, but you'd also just be kind of building back toward the field. But if you're with the field on either of those guys, totally fine. And you want both of them plus Giddey. Again, Lou Dort on DraftKings for $4,000. Very interesting. 0.75 per minute. All those OKC guys from the middle are moderate producers in a per minute sense. Here's Cason Wallace for cheaper, 0.72 per minute. The rest of that team, outside of the star caliber players, all are about in that range, but they all play very reliable 30-minute stints or upper 20s, depending on who we're talking about and how they're projected. Everybody gets pretty reliable minutes. They all have pretty distinct roles. I expect Lou Dort to be out there locking it down on defense today against the Knicks. It kind of hampers expectations for some of those Knicks as far as offensive production. As far as his own just raw production, he's not a top-end guy for $4,000, but he is landing in 18% of our DraftKings lineups. He's a functional piece. If you come up Lou Dort in a lineup, you don't need to take him out. You don't need to worry about that spot. But you could, obviously, pivot him to one of the value guys and see what it buys you. So, looks good, but not critical. Looks good, not great, but is well above our value threshold at $594. Shea at 10-4, 5.18. I'll take that for a value mark on DraftKings. Again, very starsy, scrubsy slate, so we're going to be able to get Shea in there with some of the other stars of the day, or at least some of the upper mid-range types. 17% exposed, technically a little bit below the field, but you can carry more Shea if you can get there. 1.54 per minute is one of the best marks on the entire slate. 32% usage. The Knicks have been kind of a sieve defensively for guys who can get to the rack. So, I mean, everything about the Shea spot looks pretty good here. Throw the Garden on top of that if you like the artificial reasons to pump things up. No reason in the world to go away from Shea. On FanDuel at 11-4, it's kind of a different play for 1,000 more. We're still getting them 10% of the time, but that 4.81, a little bit more challenging for value there. We're below the field further on the FanDuel slate, but it's still Shea. You can take more of them if you can get there. Keon Ellis looking like a mix and match play from the mid-range on FanDuel at 53, both guard spots. 4,000 shooting guard only on DraftKings. He is another guy who's on the value board. Like, that's 646 on other slates. This would be the top value guy of the day by a pretty wide margin. But today, in the way that DraftKings has been pricing value guys the last 3 or 4 days, or essentially for the entire new year, forget it. The 646 barely matters. He's in 12% of our top 150. That's below the field. He is an alternative to shares of these guys. You can directly pivot $4,100 Buddy Hield into $4,000 Keon Ellis all you like. Keon's going to play similar minutes. They're relatively similar producers in terms of the fantasy points per minute. No, that's not actually fair to Buddy. It's closer on FanDuel, 0.81 for Keon versus 0.89 for Buddy. On DraftKings, it's 0.77 versus 0.94, so Buddy's a distinctly better performer per minute on DK. But the value is there at 6.46. But that's a great illustration of how it's falling by the wayside alongside of how good some of these options look. He's also a pivot from $3,300 Lindy Waters if you can get there for $700 more. But that's really all he is. He's not the critical value of the day. On FanDuel, 5+ value, again, perfectly fine, 14.6%. Just a functional guy from the lower mid-range type tier. Kelly Oubre, 12% below the field. We're just under our 5 value threshold. He's not a bad option on FanDuel, and he could outperform those numbers. He was a better player in a per minute sense last year, 0.92 on 22% usage. He's down to 0.83 this year, 17% usage. But again, missing bodies, reason to believe a little bit of additional production from Oubre, a little bit of additional opportunity. We've got him at 36 minutes. Last time out, he played 38. He put up a 34.8 FanDuel score. It's essentially somewhere in between these two numbers, doing the rough estimate there. So he's perfectly fine, but he is coming up a little lighter than the field. I'm happy to have a position like that on him. And I think that having the negative position on him is probably the stronger spot to be. Same deal on DraftKings, the exact same exposure, 12% under the field, but 5+ value or 5.5+ on the value scale. He's only 57 over there, but he loses his multi-position. But it's a desirable spot. No question about it. I do think that the other Sixers are more appealing. Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, both way more shares on both sides. But he works 57, works out of the mid-range. You're going to see a decent number of shares of Kelly Oubre. Trying, Trav. Appreciate it. Could be Travis is listening on 2X. I always wonder how ridiculous I sound when I start doing the talking fast routine and then, or trying to anyway. And then it's on 2x speed. Probably sound absurd. Theodore Parson chimes in. Kirk could play Quentin Post. Wouldn't shock me. They are extremely short-handed. I don't have him projected for anything. Has he played in... Let's see. The reason I pulled it up is because... the place where the ownership comes from does have they threw him a minute. I don't usually like to play that game. I'll take the scrap minute and put it on somebody who's more likely to play it. And then if he plays a minute and the other guy's a minute short, so be it. Yeah, they've still got it there. Wouldn't completely shock me. Guy Santos is on the board as well. I think that's how you say that name, Guy, right? Haven't seen it yet, Mamba. Sorry, is questionable as of the last time I updated. Sarr and Poole, both questionable. No news since the show started, so still questionable. So with that heavy top end, we're already down into the sub-double digits numbers here. The single digits. Cole Anthony coming up 9% on DraftKings. Against the field, that's a little bit light. He's a 5.5 plus value score, 5.62 value score. For 5,500, he could continue to give you production here. Got him at 28 minutes. He's a 1.08 per minute player. Yeah, Banchero's coming back. That's going to take away some of the usage for some of the time when Banchero's out there. But again, I'm expecting him to play essentially half the game, if that. So Anthony's still going to have his opportunity to do his thing. 26.9 minutes in the most recent game. He put up 31.1 FanDuel points. That'll pay the bills on DraftKings at 55. On FanDuel, we didn't get a single share. He's a 4.5 value score. He's projected for 30 points. Point guard and shooting guard eligible, but the price is up at 6,700. It has an impact there. Mo Moody, who is probable, could easily play more than 26. 3,900 right now. He's a 5.36 value score. He comes up 3% of the time on FanDuel. That is below the field, but you could take more on the idea that he could play more and gain upside there if the field's going to be low on him. You can absolutely try and game that a little bit with the fragility of minutes for Golden State right now. And if you see starting lineups that differ from what the minutes look like, obviously pivot around those things, and we'll catch up with the projections. On DraftKings, he's 36, 8.6%, a little bit below the field, but note 5.9 value score for that very, very cheap price. He's not a good per minute guy, or he's an average per minute guy, 0.82 this year. He was 0.87 last year. He can get it going. So not a terrible mixer at worst. Cason Wallace did not come up on FanDuel. Again, we're talking about these, moderate 0.7s type guys. 0.72 on DraftKings. For 3,600, we did get a little bit of Cason Wallace. He's a 6+ value at that mark. DraftKings just has everybody priced too low, and mostly it's around these 0.7, 0.8 type guys who play upper 20s into the 30s minutes. And, big part of that is like OKC. Big part of that is like Memphis. These guys have just been mispriced on DK in recent days. I was talking about it the other day on this show. So a couple few shares of any of these guys is fine. And again, these guys are swappable pieces here for some of these guys through here. But nobody in this territory really looking like a priority. Jamal Murray, 7,600, both guard spots, playing at a 1.05 this year. Going up against Brooklyn, they should absolutely obliterate the Brooklyn backups in Denver in a home game. But what does that really mean for Jamal Murray's upside when he's already not quite playing to his peak? 1.05 this year on both sides, 1.22 last year. Usage way down. Lonzo's a lot more interesting. 3,900 on DraftKings, 47 on FanDuel. I've only got him at 24 minutes, but in that game environment, that's giving him a 5.17 value score. We're above the value threshold on FanDuel. It's another guy at 6.12 that would be on other slates, one of the critical values of the day for 3,900. On this slate, we're getting him 4% of the time. We're getting just mix and match type shares and below the field on him, because of how much is sinking into these guys. But again, if you're going away from $4,100 Buddy Hield, can you go to a $3,900 Lonzo Ball? Absolutely. That Chicago game is the most appealing game environment of the day. So yes, that is a pivot point. 6.12 is a value score that works perfectly fine for this slate. But keep in mind what those minutes look like. Keep in mind what the ceiling is going to look like versus the ceiling for a guy like Buddy, who's going to just play more, or more likely is going to play more. Halliburton, Jaylen Brown, 1%, 6% on FanDuel, 3%, 2% on DraftKings. These are other guys. These are your pivot points, right? We talked about it at length before, but these are guys who are very, very viable at 86 and 85, even though they're not coming up, even though we're getting less than the field and they're not great value marks or anything. If you're talking about that spot, what can I pivot out of in my single entry? Maybe we're talking about pivoting out of $8,100 Zach LaVine in favor of, if we could get there, $8,500 Jaylen Brown in that lineup, because the ceiling is similar. even though the game environment radically favors the Levine play, the players, the production, the ceilings are similar. And the ownership is going to be way, way lower. That creates an inflection point for you. That creates a leverage point while not giving up on the best plays of the day. Levine is among those guys. But you can see by the exposure, you can see by the angle against the field and the value mark that he's a lot more replaceable to those lineups than some of these other guys. So that's kind of a way to think about it. You know, maybe instead of value, we should be talking about like replacement, value against replacement is kind of the way to really think about it when we talk about that number. And you can see like Buddy Hield against every replacement option on the slate is astronomically higher. Where Zach LaVine at 81 against every replacement option on the slate is not that crazy high. He's a lot closer to the pack. So those, again, to illustrate the point, those are the guys that you want to be considering your swaps on, while just having the solid foundation of just the chalk of the day. You don't need to get away from guys just because they're the raw highest owned guys of the day. In fact, you don't want to do that. Nemhard mix and match. Isaiah Joe mix and match from that same 0.79, 0.81. Christian Brown, nothing on FanDuel. We did get him 1% on DraftKings. He's a 5 value score, 4,600. Just a guy who falls by the wayside a little bit. Reliable 30 minutes. He's a decent player, 0.81, 0.79. On other slates, that would be functional, and you'd get him 8, 10, 15%. On this slate, he's not really coming up critical, but as a rotational piece in a bunch of lineups, you can certainly have a little bit of Christian Brown. I think that's the first time I did that this season. I was on a roll with Christian Brown. Bridges mix and match play is who he is kind of a spot. It's the case for most of the Knicks, but again, with the Knicks starters, if you get a couple of them in the basket across a bunch of lineups from the pool of starters, absolutely you can take them. There's nothing wrong with them. Jordan Poole, speaking of pools, mix and match play on FanDuel, 2.6%. If he plays, that's well below the field. I have no love for Jordan Poole. 1.13 per minute is good. It is a high-end game environment. He would be one of the more appealing guys from Washington if he plays. If he doesn't play, I think he's more impactful to the slate than he is if he does play. Dame, not really coming up on either site. Murray, if he plays, 2% on FanDuel, not coming up really at all on DraftKings. Jalen Brunson, not coming up on either site. Again, with the Knicks starters, you can absolutely play any of those guys. If Cat doesn't go, there's a bounce for Brunson. There's a bounce for OG, Bridges, and Hart. But keep in mind who the Knicks are playing today. They're going up against OKC. So that's not really a grinder that you want to chase that much. So again, the Knicks are more odds and ends than they are on a lot of normal slates. Outside of that, no real outliers. A couple few shares on Keon Johnson and Zaire Williams and Ben Simmons and Jordan Poole, who we just mentioned. None of those guys coming up on DraftKings. What was this? Look at that hiding down there. Bub Carrington, a 5.61 value score on DraftKings, did not get into a lineup in that sim. That's wild. 4% on FanDuel for the same, 5.49. That's a monster FanDuel value score. Now I'm curious. Low single-digit ownership. That is, I mean, not crazy appealing, but I think I would take that over that Jordan Poole play. It's relegated to no shares, again, because of the 46 at both guard spots, even though it's a 5.61 value, and you can talk about the Guy Santos play down here at 5.08 as well. The way that those bounce off everything up here just boxed them out of every share. But as a one lineup build guy, at a 5.61 value, if you're looking to get out of a like Nemhard share that you stumbled into, sure, but that's not the example I was looking for. See, that's the thing. This is why we got so much of them. All these guys are like 3s, some 5s, some 4s that are significantly lower, the 3s, the 4s, or you're in the 5s. He just is that 46 is just a weird price fit for this slate. And like the 48s, we only got it at 2%. So you can see how the value stacks go through at the guard position, where what those critical price points are. A guy at 46 who has a great value score, again, on a different slate, this would be a guy who's up in this territory. Just doesn't land that way because of the extra $600 on his price tag. If he was at 4, he'd be one of these plays. But that's one that is a reasonable pivot point, right? Not one to chase, I don't think. But if you're staring at a lineup where you're like, all right, I went with some of these value dudes and I got Keon Ellis is in that lineup, or let's say Lou Dort is in that lineup at 4,000. And he's 18, 20, let's say 22% owned. And the sim said to get there, but we talked about how he's a low end, per minute guy, very solid minutes, but he's only all right. And that lineup there's 600 sitting on the table, and I filled out all my spots, and I got my Giannis share, and I got my value guys from up here, and my Paul George, and my Maxey, and so on and so forth. All right, maybe I can spend that $600 a little bit better. Since there's nobody for that upgrade amount in this territory, if you had the 800, you could get Andrew Nemhard if you wanted him, 0.86 per minute, a little bit more popularity. But it has zeroed out, essentially, 1-2% owned. That's not a bad value pivot in that circumstance where you had that extra 600 in your pocket. Odds are you're going to build that lineup out and not have that extra 600. That's why these $3,000 and $4,000 guys are so crucial, and the $4,600 guy didn't land. But that's another way that you can consider some of those pivots. But again, you want to do it from these guys, not necessarily from those guys. $457. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe if you get a chance. Bunch of people here hanging out. If you get a chance, check out rotoscouts.com. These projections, not this dashboard necessarily, but these projections are available to you, along with NFL projections, along with NHL projections for every main slate, every basketball main slate, every hockey main slate, every football showdown as far as the primetime showdown games, plus every main slate, Saturday, Sunday this weekend, plus a Monday night showdown. All of it. Access not per sport, but all of it under $1 a day. Rotoscouts.com. Weekly, monthly, quarterly plans available. Jump on today. It gets you through next Friday for under $7 for all 3 of the major sports going on right now. When baseball starts up again 2 months from now, it's on the pile as well. Trav Looney was up on near the top of the board as well. Everybody Golden State's just going to look good. Also, check out our guys over at acemind.io. That's where the sims run. My projections go into their pool, and we run the sim tools on their site. If you use promo code ROTOSCOUTS, 20% off your first month over there. Great site. Great bunch of fellas. So there's Looney at the top of the board among power forwards and centers, or among forwards and centers. 71% exposed. He's an 8+ value. I'll note that's actually the best value score on this slate. I have him at 21 minutes. I have no love whatsoever for that spot as far as the fragility of those minutes. He averages 16. He played 20.8 last night. I would expect around the 21. But if it doesn't go that way, I would not be surprised. But they're extremely short-handed, and he is one of the, nominally one of the NBA players on that team tonight. So one would expect around these minutes with, honestly, there's a little bit of trajectory into the 24-ish kind of range. And every single moment that you get him more on the court, he's a good per minute player from a fantasy sense. 1.17 on FanDuel, 1.14 on DraftKings. Fills the stat sheet. 53.8% true shooting is whatever, but 15.3% assist, 18.9% rebound. Doug says, I think Aaron Wiggins is viable at 32 on DK. He absolutely is viable in that he's just going to fall into that bucket of, moderate producers, but he's one of the better guys from that spot on OKC. Any of these OKC guys will be able to succeed offensively against the Knicks. At 3,200, he's a solid value square, 5.82 value, but that's, pales in comparison to some of the other value marks on the board. So it just depends on what you're swapping him in there for, but he's totally viable. 10% in our sims, that's below the field. I wouldn't look to chase him up the ladder back to the field, but if you're talking about, a couple of lineups, no problem with it as a functional piece of the slate. Got him right on his minutes average. So any slate where we're coming away with nearly 60% Nikola Jokic in our pocket after lineup building is a positive one in my mind. 1.79 per minute for the season. You should be able to just abuse Brooklyn for however long he's out there. I don't really care that he was sick for most of the week unless that means he doesn't play today. If he plays, I fully expect, totally engaged Nikola Jokic. And he's capable of, if he's not fully healthy, just being him out there and doing different things that he does well on the court and getting his points anyway. So I really have no concerns about it. On FanDuel, he's a 4.9 value score. It's not the same play. The 5.17 is a little bit more appealing. It's still below technically our 5.5, but that functions differently at the top shelf. But at 4.91 on FanDuel, we got him 36% of the time at the center spot. He's very, very appealing, and we got him ahead of the field. But he's a little bit functionally different on the FanDuel slate. We got a ton of slow-mo at 75%, power forward and small forward on FanDuel, power forward only on DraftKings, 3,500 over there. I suspect that's a little bit of the positioning, accounting for that additional 20% or so that we're getting on FanDuel. 6.18 value score on FanDuel, 7.02 on DraftKings. So losing that small forward probably on DK keeps him out of a few of these lineups. We're above the field, but gently above the field, where we're more strongly above the field on these guys and the value guards that were at the top of the board. That's another reason that my answer to that question that was asked before, gun to my head, if I had to take somebody out from those top value guys and then top stars, the most highly owned guys, probably would be Slow-Mo. Just because of how we're more gently against the field. But again, great looking play as long as he plays any minutes whatsoever. Got him at 26. Played 9 last night. Paul George, we've talked about at length. Lindy Waters, we've talked about at length. Zach LaVine, we've talked about. Giannis is Giannis. Any slate where you can come away with 57% of Jokic and 21% of Giannis, and probably the ability to put them in the same lineup, given all the $3,000 and $4,000 guys you've got on DK tonight, I would bet that there are lineups. Let's see. I can cheat. Not at the top of the board. Looks like one or the other in our top end lineups in the sim. But one of them, just glancing at this one, Paul George, Jason Tatum, and Nikola Jokic are in that one, along with Schroeder, Buddy, Slow-Mo, Case and Wallace, and Kevon Looney. It's a pretty damn good lineup. That's 3 or 4 down the board. So just going by what those guys are priced at, I assume you can get to the construction with both of them, but it's not going to be your most optimal approach. But just the knowing that you've got the ability to put them together, presumably. And none are jumping out. I don't see. I'm sure there's one in here, but I'm not going to spend more time looking for it. But again, you have plenty of money to spend is the point that ultimately matters. On FanDuel, Giannis comes up above the field over there as well, 30.6%. Just like Jokic, he's at a lower relative value score than we're typically hunting for. But from those top shelf guys that are the best producers in basketball, it just doesn't matter as much as it does for your average player, for your value guys most especially. MPJ, 15% FanDuel, 20% DraftKings. Looks like an Izui is kind of a spot, as bad as Brooklyn might be. 0.95 per minute, 19% usage. We just get MPJ most of the time right in that territory. And again, you could say that about anybody based on what their median projection is, but just seems like MPJ's there more, not showing any special kind of value marks at 478 on FanDuel, little closer to the board at 523 on DraftKings. We got him at 20% over there. 1 in 5 of our lineups feels about right. Leave a little bit on the table for the field because there are better options. But he's at worst a pivot point. Tatum among the stars, 21% on FanDuel, 14% on DraftKings. Same deal as with Giannis and Jokic. Superstar caliber player. He plays at a lower rate than those two guys do, but that's why he's, another 1,000 offset from, 2,600 offset from Jokic, 16 offset from Giannis. Same deal on DraftKings. He's another step down price-wise. So that rate downturn is built in. 21% of them on the FanDuel slate with the field. I do like the fact that on DraftKings we've got a position on him, but honestly I would not mind having a little bit more, so I guess I'm okay being with the field over there too. 15% feels a little bit light. Kuzma, monster share on FanDuel. I wasn't expecting that. I guess that's the Washington side of that one finally showing its face. Nearly 40% Kyle Kuzma on the FanDuel slate. That's something. They get the benefit of the crazy tempo and the super high game score in that game as well. But it's a more R spot for Washington than it is for Chicago. But that's where the Washington shares are coming up for sure. 5.32 value score for Kuzma on FanDuel. On DraftKings, not nearly as critical at 6,400. Power forward only, so no positional flex. A few $100 more. 5.3 value score is not far off our 5.5 mark, but it falls short and is way more value plays on the slate. 14%, that's fine. I'm happy having a position on it. Patty Williams, another guy from that game, coming up pretty crucial on FanDuel. 24%, essentially 1 in 4 lineups. 4,500 power forward only. 43 power forward only with a 5.73 value on DraftKings. Just 12% below the field. It's a 0.78 per minute player. I get why it would come up that way. But if you had more Patty Williams than that, I don't think it's necessarily bad. So if you're at the field with Patty, it's okay. And that's kind of represented with our shading here. It's not a dramatic undercut like that one is. $9,400 Sabonis. Again, Sabonis versus Karl Anthony Towns, like I think it was Mamba asked about earlier in the show, or maybe it was Power, I forget who. That's a reasonable back and forth. And we got both guys below the field. We got Sabonis already at essentially double the ownership of Cat. If Cat zeroes out, obviously, you take him off the board and you can sink those 5% directly into Sabonis there. That's perfectly fine. If you just wanted to make that as a decision, as a point, I don't think you're making a mistake necessarily. Cat could break the slate. He's got that ability. But since we're already coming up as a pretty hard undercut to the field, just getting him 5% of the time, the thing about it and those of you who are here regularly will know that I'm about to say the thing about that is all you're doing in that case is pushing him back toward the field and not even getting to the field. And again, I do think that your better investments are up in that territory, but Sabonis is perfectly fine. 136 per minute, 132 per minute. I typically don't love throwing guys into Boston in general, but he's going to be able to do his thing in that matchup. So again, totally fine, but not showing any special value or any reason to rush out and have to have them. Pascal Siakam, 4.77 value on FanDuel, 4.97 on DraftKings. An inconsequential looking piece, but a guy with reasonable upside on any given slate. 1.07 per minute FanDuel, 1.10 per minute DraftKings. He was a 1.15 player on a little bit higher usage last year. He's functional, but not a priority. A little bit better looking on FanDuel. Wiggins, as mentioned, 46 on FanDuel just does not work in 22 minutes, even with him being one of the better of those guys in the lower end per minute guys from OKC. Just not getting enough time in that projection. At 32, he is getting enough time. That puts him in a 5.82 value. We're getting him 10% of the time. We're below the field. But again, he is at least capable on this slate from a value score. So a value salary. So if you're pivoting $3,300, 28% exposed in our Sims and level with the field Lindy Waters into shares of him, it's not a tragic mistake at worst for 100 less to go there. You are sacrificing a chunk of value. You're sacrificing a chunk of median projection. But that is a non-guaranteed chunk on both sides, so perfectly fine doing that. I would not mind having more Jalen Williams at 8,300 against the Knicks on DraftKings. 8%. It's another guy that's more gently below the field than it might look like with that stark red arrow. The yellow background is more what we're looking for there as far as relatively close to the field. 5+ value score is fine. It's not our 5-5, but I'll take it. And he's a very, very good per minute player. In terms of the rebounding battles and everything that might be going on versus like his ability to score against Cat. If Cat is out there as a big man, like I'll take the Jalen side of that one, I think. So give me a little bit more than that on DraftKings. But again, you just kind of be pushing him back to the field. But if I can still be undercutting slightly and be at like even 12 instead of 8 across 150 lineups, a little bit happier about that. On the FanDuel side, we're already getting 24%, 5 just on the threshold of being a 5 value score for 8,500. It's a 1.25 per minute FanDuel player. I just like the option a lot. I think he works very, very well. He's got the power forward and small forward eligibility, so you can move him around in conjunction with everybody else. Works very well on this slate. This one maybe a little surprising with Drummond and Embiid out. The minutes are going to be rock solid for Yabusele, but 5,900, we've kind of course-corrected price-wise. That does still put us above a 5 on FanDuel as far as that value score. Got into 5% of our lineups. Is gently below the field. Same thing on DraftKings at 55. That's a 5.29 value score. It falls a little bit light from 5.5, but good enough. 8% of our lineups. But we've got better options at those positions in that salary tier. And he probably just bounces off some of those numbers like what we were looking at before, where it's like 46 didn't quite work against 3s or 5s. His number might not work quite as well because we're going higher or lower up and down the board here. Right? So 55, just an awkward price fit. Everybody above him is either more than like 1,500 more. No, that one's only 900 more. So 900 more or like 2,000 less. That's the range. So it's just a weird price fit that's kind of boxing him out of shares. It's just interesting how these things come together. But those are ones that are worth spotting sometimes, because if that means the field's not getting there because of how the slate mashes together via tools, it's kind of an anti-optimizer play. You might be there with some hand builders, but might be a little bit anti-optimizer play. I don't hate a little bit of Yabusele. Now, we are below the field, so again, you just kind of be leveraging him back up to the field or levering him back up to the field. And that would be like 15%. Maybe you got a little edge if you can get to that mark on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it might be easier, considering this probably means he's like 8%. So if you can get your way to like 10, 12, 15, you can gain a little bit more ground versus the field there. It's not a crazy plan on FanDuel. Vooch, 12% FanDuel, 3% DraftKings. Another guy who will benefit greatly from playing Washington today. But out of everybody from the Bulls, from the starting group from the Bulls, he is coming up the least. But I never mind having a little bit of Vooch. He's still playing at 1.24, 1.27 on DraftKings. 8,000 is not inappropriate. It's a 5.22 value on FanDuel. A little bit lighter on DraftKings at 5.01 for your 8,500. But still workable. Hartenstein, first game back at the Garden. Love the player. Don't think he's got revenge in his heart against the Knicks, but just an excellent player in a good spot. I can totally see him doing a little bit of scoring, but that's not really his game. But when he does score, it's typically on putbacks and work around the rack, and he's going to have every opportunity to do that against the Knicks. So competing with his old pals for those rebounds, but Hartenstein stuff stats. 18.9% assist rate, 19.1% rebounding rate. Got him at 31 minutes for your 7,200. At worst, he's a functional part and another pivot point in the mid-range at the center spot on both sides. Playable, but not a priority. Alex Sarr, if he goes, mix and match play, 5%, 2%. Josh Hart, if you get more shares than this of Josh Hart, that's totally fine. The minutes are solid, if not light. At 38, he could easily play 40+, and we know what he can do. I love Josh Hart, man. As a Knicks fan, let me rave about Josh Hart over and what he's been saying, like in the media and everything over the last couple of days.
One, he was out there saying like, I consider it a successful game when my teammates are good, right? I consider myself here to serve my teammates, I think was what he said, or a servant to my teammates, something like that. Just like, it's the guy that you would want on any team just for the dirty work that he does. And the fact that that's how he thinks about the game. And then on top of that, he's been chirping at the refs all season and going back over the last few years. And he's been getting teed up a little bit. And apparently he pulled one of the refs aside and had a conversation with one of the officials and said, like, look, am I getting a bad rep? Like, am I, do I have a bad reputation among the officials? Like, what's going on? Like, why is that something I need to pay attention to? And apparently the ref was honest with him and told him, like, look, we like you. We think you're a great player. You're passionate. But sometimes that passion becomes arguing for no reason, just, and it seems like you feel like you're playing 5-on-8 out there. Like, we're against you too, where we're neutral. And he apparently, not to put a bad pun on it, but took that to heart and is intending to go out there and work on it. Does that translate into arguing less? Who knows? But it's just great having a player who's aware of those things and going about the game that way. Who's also totally dismissive of the idea of the minutes potentially ruining them. The direct quote was, we're going to play the game the way it should be played. That means these guys like playing basketball. That's what I love. Anyway, moving on from my raving about Josh Hart, I got to get myself a Josh Hart jersey. Peyton Watson, mix and match at best, onesie, twosie shares on both sites. Everybody from here down on DK is in onesie, twosie shares, including Trace Jackson Davis, who's the biggest outlier site to site. At 6,200, we did get a big chunk of him. He's still questionable, or at least as of the last time I looked at news. 20% exposed on FanDuel. That's below the field center and power forward eligibility is probably what's getting him there. 5,500 on DraftKings. Cheaper price, above our value threshold. We get a 1% of the time on DK. We just don't really need that spot, given how everything else falls around it. But if you're going away from $3,200 teammate over here, you could go in that direction and still probably get to most of these plays. So he's at worst, again, another guy who's on the board for rotational value on DraftKings. Where on FanDuel, he's a little bit more interesting, 20% and 5.25 value score. 5.14 value for Obi, landed in 8%, but not really critical. If you get him, it's fine. 6% of Zion. I got him at 28. Didn't play after his debut game the other day. What did he play in that one? Come on. Yeah, 28. It comes up on the other one. There's reason to believe he could go out and have a decent performance for 8,000, but we're coming up a little bit light as just far as how he stacks up against everybody else. I know somebody mentioned him in the chat before. I don't know that we're there yet. I know the price looks kind of appealing, but I feel like that's a little bit more of a trap than anything else. We're getting there a little, but I feel like that's a spot I can let the field have even for 8,000. At 9,000 on DraftKings, I don't think you should go anywhere near it. I think that's just a total misprice. Not for the player in his talent sense, but just for what my expectation of what this looks like tonight. I don't think we're going there. Joe Val, mix and match. KP, same deal, mix and match piece at best. This is where we just get into guys who are, not bad, but appropriately priced. Some of the Nets who have been values recently, like, Zaire Williams at 5,200, not landing on either site, 51 on DraftKings, not at all important to either site at those prices. These Nets are just falling off the table today because they're all kind of appropriately priced up into the Tyrese Martin 5,052 for the role that they've been playing lately. But with the Warriors in dramatically different roles and value priced, we just don't need these mediocre Nets. And they're all just not good. They're not terrible, but they're all, 0.7s, 0.8 type guys or worse. Not too much more down the board to talk about there, gang. Oh, Zion out? Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate the heads up there. When did that land? Suspended 1 game for violation of team policies. How about that? As of 10 minutes ago. All right. So don't play Zion. Pull that up real quick. So what are we getting at now? A little bit more of got Javante at 26, Boston at 20. That's 29. So 2 or 3 minutes ago in that direction, one or the other of those guys. Hawkins will get a few more. Jeremiah Robinson Earl will get a few more, I think. He played 20 in the last game. I've got him at 18. Daniel Dice will get a couple. It's just a downstream impact, and then somebody will jump onto the board from the guys who aren't currently projected. Like in their last game, it looks like Antonio Reeves and Carlo Makovich got on the court for 6 minutes apiece. I think it's just going to be a downstream for as far as how those minutes are going to get distributed. And then at the top of the board, we'll see what the rate adjustments look like for Murray, McCollum, and so on and so forth. But essentially, it's just going to kick them back into a somewhat of a version of what they've been through this season. But no Herb on top of that, no Trey on top of that. Trey Murphy, compounds that issue. So that's one to watch for in the update as it comes out. No other critical news broken yet. He was late for the flight to Philly. Dude, when your reputation is so bad as far as your desire to play, your ability to not gorge yourself on cheeseburgers and be late for things, being late to a flight, and I'm the last person who should be criticizing somebody for being late or missing a flight, but that's just bad, man. You're a professional being paid millions and millions of dollars. Have a staff to get you to the airport. It doesn't even have to be your responsibility. Pay someone to get you to the airport. And granted, I don't know the situation. Maybe there was a flood and he couldn't get to the airport. I don't know. But good God. If that's your reputation, you got to do better. Mamba hates Josh Hart as a person. He's annoying. I love Josh Hart as a person. He's funny. He's a damn good basketball player. Hartenstein was funny after the OKC Knicks game last week. Or maybe it was before it. I think it was before it because he was saying, he was talking about I'm looking forward to seeing those guys, except for Hart, man. Can't stand that guy. And he was being facetious. He was kidding, but just funny. He was calling out Josh Hart directly, saying, man, that guy. Expected, but officially a minutes limit for Paolo. Yeah, again, Power, I wouldn't expect him to play more than half the game. I've got him at 24. If it's 26, wouldn't knock me out of my chair, but I wouldn't go much beyond that. I don't think he's really on the board here. With that in mind, gang, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Get those notifications for when I kick these shows off. They're all over the place schedule-wise. Typically in the 4 to 5 range for basketball, but I'm trying to edge that up a little bit more toward 3:30, 4 o'clock regularly. Just seems like a better spot. But you guys absolutely rock out there. Check out rotoscouts.com. Access to everything. Everything. Under $1 a day across the board. No per sport fees. The goal here is to cater to people who are not spending or not looking to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on their projection sets. Most people in the industry build 1, 5, maybe 10 lineups. Everything, the good news, if you're a 150 lineup builder, everything works just as well for you. But the goal is to approach the people who are building a few lineups a night and looking to spend a few bucks a day and keep most of it in their bankroll. So check it out, rotoscouts.com. For under $7, you can get from here to next weekend and give it a try. Not a bad deal. Also check out acemind.io. That's our sim partners. That's where I run the sims that we're talking about as far as these exposure percentages.
Promo code RotoScouts, all in caps, gets you 20% off your first month over there. No, thank you, Cujo. I appreciate you, buddy. Thank every single one of you guys out there. Everybody who's bought a subscription, everybody who's clicked a like on any show I've ever done, anybody who subscribes to the YouTube channel. Still trying to push that up over 1,000. We were trying to push 1,000 before the new year. Let's go 1,000 before what? Easter? Whatever's next. President's Day? You guys absolutely rock. Appreciate you. Let me drop a link to the Discord in there real quick because there are some new people, it looks like, in the chat, or some folks who know us but don't come around all the time. So hop into the Discord if you get a chance. I'm in there all the time. Sometimes my cat's in there typing on the keyboard as well. You guys rock. Good luck out there tonight. Somebody go win something. And we'll be back on Monday. Oh, football projections. Football projections will be up for tomorrow's games and probably Sunday's games tonight. So keep an eye out for those. The Saturday games will go up not long after this slate locks. Got most of that all aligned already. So that'll be up and running for you guys and going forward with that. And I'll put together the different columns, the groups, and the rankings and everything like usual. So good luck out there. Somebody go win something. We'll see you soon. Later.